This is Dr. Anastasia Chopelas, and today what I'm going to talk about is is the quantum field and quantum healing and everything to do with quantum and what that is all about. And the reason why I'm talking about this is I was just at a conference this weekend and somebody talked about how do we reach the quantum field. And of course, when I hear something like that, it's like my brain starts all going like, what? I don't get it. I don't get it. Because in actuality, we are in the quantum field. So, what quantum physics is, or quantum mechanics, is a description of our physical reality, right? So, we have a non physical reality, but our physical reality is the quantum field. And what quantum means is that when you go down to atomic proportions, the typical Newtonian physics, which is Newtonian physics is basically using simple equations to describe motion or to describe gravity or to describe acceleration and velocity and mass and all that. And we know that. So when you throw a baseball, you don't observe its wavelength, for example. But if you are to shoot an electron, let's say, from the old-fashioned CRT screens, the old-fashioned TV screens where they sprayed electrons on a phosphor screen to create your picture, right? So we know how to shoot electrons, and the wavelengths are observable because they are not infinitesimally small. Right, so they start to expand. The smaller a particle is, the wavelength then expands and becomes observable within our instrumentation. The problem with a very small wavelength, like with cosmic rays, is it just goes through everything because it goes between atoms and it goes through all the empty space that atoms are. So we are in the quantum field. And so what does it mean when people say, how do you reach the quantum field? What they really are trying to say is, how do you reach the information field? And what that is a separate dimension. So you have dimensions here of height, width, depth, and time. So we are in a fourth dimensional space. And the other dimension that people are talking about is, you may have heard the term fifth dimension. And that's where all information is. That's information space. And what that means is that basically what it means when you're in information space is that all you know is the information. There's no time involved. And we actually know how to get there mathematically. And you can even get an app on your phone, and I'll show you that in a minute. So the reason why quantum is such an interesting word, actually you've already known that word for a long time, like quantity, right? So in Latin, quantity, it means quantum, a unit, a piece of information, or a piece of an article, or like an atom is a quantum, right? But in what made it interesting and why they coined quantum physics is that way back in the early 1900s, there was an experiment called the photoelectric experiment, and that yielded some very weird and unexpected results. And so the person who did it was a physicist named Leonard. And what he did was he changed wavelengths and observed how, he mainly changed the color of light that he shone on a metal plate, which was connected to two electrodes. And then when he changed the wavelength, he could create electricity. So photoelectric, very simple. And you all have experienced it when you go into a store and you break the light beam. And as soon as you break the light beam, you hear beep beep, like meaning you've entered into it. So they're using light on a photoelectric material that it will produce electricity, and then as soon as you break the beam, then the electricity stops and creates an alarm. And it's also like the photocells that you have on the roof of houses, or even on those little cheapy calculators now. You can get something that as soon as you shine light on it, it generates electricity and it'll drive the calculator. So you already know about all this stuff in your everyday life. So that the physics behind it, that's where Einstein started examining it, noticing that, wow, light must come in particles, because it's not intensity driven, it's wavelength driven. And in order to eject an electron out, you had to have exactly the same amount of energy coming in with light. And you can't just up the intensity by throwing more light at it. What you had to do is get the wavelength up. And so he's the one that basically started people thinking about that light comes in discrete quantities, or what they called quanta, and that started basically the whole quantum revolution. And so now in the 1920s or so, there was a French physicist named Louis de Broglie, and he said, well, if light comes in particle forms, then why don't particles have wave-like behaviors? So he started looking at that and noticed they did some experiments, and I'm going to describe these experiments in a moment, because it is a way to help create your own reality, what you want to create. So what he did, what people started doing, was taking electrons. Like I mentioned earlier, it's very easy to shoot electrons at something. You just have to heat a metal up, or run a lot of voltage through a metal, and it'll start ejecting electrons. So you can start shooting electrons at something. I know this is a little bit scientific, but I promise I'm going to get to the point. So you start shooting electrons at something, and what they did was they started shooting it through two slits. So when you shoot a light through slits, and you can use your eyelashes as an example, you know, when you're looking at when it's bright outside and you have a reflection, if you lower your eyes and let the light come through your eyelashes, you'll start to see little rainbow things. So what the slits do is it starts spreading the light out into its component parts. And if you had a single wavelength, like with a laser, and you shone it through two slits, you would end up with a diffraction pattern on the back wall. So that is demonstrating wave qualities because of the constructive and destructive interference of waves. So you get this wave-like quality, and they thought, okay, so now let's try shooting electrons through the slits. And they decided, so as they shot a lot of electrons through the slits, they noticed that they got a wave pattern on the back wall. And then they started lowering the number of electrons coming off at a time until they were shooting one electron at a time. And they still got a diffraction pattern on the back wall. So they're like going like, what? The electron goes through both slits at once? Like, how can that be? This is a particle. And they tried it with neutrons and protons, and it still worked, right? So here they have this single particle and these two slits, and they're running this electron through these two slits, and they're wondering which hole it goes over. So the scientists thought, oh, we're going to be very, very clever. We're going to put a detector on one of the slits, and we're going to see which hole the electron is going through. As soon as they put the detector on the slits, on the back wall, they got two dots, as if somebody was throwing baseballs through, right? So the inability to detect the wave at the same time as the particle quality of matter, this is matter, not light, this is matter, made it so they could never see both properties at the same time. So this is one of those quantum weirdnesses, right? And it sounds really strange. And a baseball actually has a wavelength, but like I said before, it is very, 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 very small. and it's impossible for us to detect. And so you can make alpha particles, which is just a helium with the 2 electrons stripped off. You can make alpha particles and you can detect the waves of those. But the bigger the particle, the smaller the wave and the more difficult to detect. So we are in the quantum field and everything around us is quantum, and it's just who we are and what we are, right? And so you are in the quantum field. So when people start talking about quantum healing, what they really mean is something that takes a quantum leap. In other words, something that happens instantaneously, something that happens in the blink of an eye and there's no known path. And that's another peculiarity of the quantum world. When you have an atom and you have an electron going around it, right? It doesn't really do this, but let's just say for discussion purposes it does, and you want to increase the orbit, you have to pump energy in, and you can only pump in the exact amount that it takes to go from this level to that level. That's also how lasers work, why it's a single wavelength, right? You have a laser and what you're doing is you excite the electrons to this higher level, and then they drop down and everything is all the same color, all the same wavelength. So you have this very singular wavelength of light coming at you. And so, but no one has ever been able to observe the path that the electron takes to go from this level to that level. And in fact, what they observe is that it blinks out at this location and it blinks into existence at that location. So where does it go between, right? And where it goes is into that information space. So you are very familiar with information space. You don't realize you're familiar with it, but you really are. So information space. So now if you plot, let's just use music, for example, or the voice. And if you were to look at a plot, and I'm going to show it to you in a second, if you were to look at a plot of your voice as you're talking, it'll just be a bunch of squiggly lines, and the plot would be time in this direction and intensity in that direction. And now you can actually download an app onto your phone or onto your computer that will divide it down into its frequencies. So now you've got frequency on this graph and intensity on that graph, on that direction, right? So now you have just frequency. You have like if you sing a single note, you'll have a frequency plus its overtones and nothing in between. And that's pure information. And what that is a dimension. And the way you get from the time dimension to the information dimension is called a Fourier transform, F-O-U-R-I-E-R. And we know that it works. And it's actually in this same reality that we're in. So that information is within our reach, and we actually know how to get there. So what happens with we humans is that all of our life experiences are surrounding and are in our field and in our body, and it's actually controlling the flow of energy through you, or even stopping the flow of energy. Like when you have if you're very depressed, for example, it stops the flow of energy to your extremities. And they've done studies that show that a happy person is warm from head to toe, while a person that's depressed, the extremities get cool and the only warmth is left in the core. And in fact, everything seems to shut down. So your emotions and your thoughts and everything do control this, do control the flow of energy in your body, for example. So the way to reach that information space, and that really is your intuition, is to help release all of the issues, to stop that monkey mind from thinking about all of your problems. And a lot of people use meditation to do it. And I am a person that does not sit still very well. I'm even fidgeting in my chair. You might see my chair moving around, but I've always been very, very fidgety. When I was in grade school and I had loafers on, I think I was in the 2nd grade, and we were sitting in a circle reading, the teacher had to take my shoes away because I'd take them off my feet and swish them on the floor and disturb everybody. So I meditate while walking. So I'll be walking outdoors and I'll take some deep breaths and I'll just release and let go of everything and just be in the environment at the moment. So the quickest way to reach that is to be in the moment in your current environment without paying attention to what's going around you. Because what that does is it stops all of that noise that's blocking the way between you and your deep intuition and those thoughts. That's the quickest way to get there. But there are other ways to manifest. So I said all of what I said before to say this. So, as I described that wave-particle duality, and that you can either measure a particle or a photon as a wave or as a particle, but never both at the same time. So that's one of the reasons why people said that you, as an observer, will change the result of the experiment. But if you imagine you've got a cup of water and you want to measure the temperature of the water, and let's say the water is slightly warmer than the room, as soon as you put the thermometer in the water, you change the heat content in the water. As the water goes to warm the thermometer, the water starts to drop in temperature while the thermometer goes up in temperature. So you as an observer, no matter how you do it, if you have a closed system and you want to measure it, you change what's happening in there. And in fact, it's even more profound than that. I was reading in a recent book that talked more about the 0-point energy and how it explains everything in the universe. Awesome book, written for the layperson. I will put it in the notes below. I forgot who wrote it, but I know the book. I have it. I think it's called something. I think it's just called The Field. Anyway, in it describe an experiment that they did in the 60s and the 70s where they had a machine that was designed by random generation to flash an equal number of red and green flashes on 2 light bulbs. And so they would sit there and go, okay, the scientists were going, okay, is it equal? And they would start checking, and after 100 they would get 50 greens and 50 reds. So they were satisfied that the machine generated an equal amount of green and red flashes. So then they brought people in and they said, we want to check the accuracy of our machine, and we've noticed that there's more green than the red. So the person would sit down and count them up and get 45 green or 45 red and 55 green. And then they would tell another person to go into that same machine and say, I want you to note that we've noticed that there are more red than green. And they would measure it, and sure enough, they got 55 red and 45 green on the same exact machine. So their thoughts changed the reality of what the machine was doing. The next thing that happened is they decided to record it. So they recorded the number of the flashes on the tape, and they told the same people, they recorded 100 flashes, 100 flashes, 100 flashes. So they had 3 recordings, right? And they told the first person that we think it's 50-50, please check it out on the recording. And sure enough, he got 50-50. And on the next recording, they told him it was more red than green, and they got 55-45. Red to green. And on the next one, they told people that there were more green than red. Could you double check it? And sure enough, 55-45 green to red. And then they had people go back and review the tapes that had already been seen, already been noted, and they got the same results that the first people watched. So in other words, you're creating a joint reality. So it's easier to change the future, And what's already recorded, for example, so if I record a healing and somebody listens to it later, they're actually getting the healing as if they were there the first time that I did it. So they're receiving it that way. So the thing is that you can create a reality just with your mind in your belief system. And the times that doesn't happen is if you're not going to believe it. And that's also why some affirmations work, and it works for some people and some don't. So one of my problems, one of my what I'd call deficiencies, was that I was very stubborn. And I can't say, I can't just wish it away all the times and all the ways I release being stubborn, right? Because in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, oh, sure, all I have to do is say it. So that's an unbelievable statement. But if I say to myself, all the times and all the ways I'm 1% less stubborn, my mind goes, I can do that. I can do that today. I can do 1%. And then I say it for a number of days in a row. And by the time I've gone through maybe 6 months of this, the stubbornness is gone. And I call stubbornness the pejorative of assertiveness. Assertiveness, you know when to quit. And stubbornness is you don't. So stubbornness is you just keep powering through no matter how much it's hurting you. And assertiveness is you keep going in that direction. And if that direction's not quite right, you know to change course in order to achieve your goal, right? So the reality is that you can actually change your reality. In other words, you can change the outcome of something that's going to happen. And if it got recorded and nobody viewed it, then you can change the reality of what you're watching. So it poses an interesting question for people that make movies too, right? So I just wanted to show you, this is a little app that I downloaded for my phone, and it's called N-Track Tuner, and you can see that it's telling me the notes, and it's kind of rough looking because as I'm speaking, the notes are changing. But if I sing a single note, you'll just, across the bottom is frequency, and if I sing a single note, ooh, you just see, so your voice has, the fundamental and all the overtones, you'll just see the straight peaks coming up. And so this is a device that allows you to go from time dimension, and that's the note that reads like this, into information dimension. So we already know how to do it. We have simple devices, free apps that do it. And so it's a matter of checking in. So getting quiet allows you to reach into that stream of information. And just so you know what my experience was in reaching that stream of information is that when I reached in, it was getting like trying to drink out of a fire hydrant. It was getting this deluge of information. And so right after my mom died, I was sitting in meditation with a group of people. And as I sat there with my eyes closed, I saw this big bunch of red roses fly at my face. And that was like this thing between me and my mom. Every time I saw red roses, I'd buy her a bunch and take it. And she always got piles of roses on her birthday and on Mother's Day and on Christmas and on Thanksgiving. She always had a bunch of red roses. So I knew it was her communicating with me. And the next thing I heard, she says, look, I'm standing up straight. And I had this image of her when she was in her early 30s and standing up very straight. Because what happened, she had back surgery and they broke some of her vertebrae and it caused her neck to do this. And as she got older, she dipped further and further, deeper and deeper into being bent over. And that was all from surgery. So the standing up straight was a giant victory. And I saw and heard that very clearly. So just getting quiet with yourself so you stop all of this happening, especially closing your eyes because a lot of information comes in through your eyes, and taking some deep breaths and bringing yourself into the moment, that will help you reach that state where you can hear your intuition. And you're not reaching into the quantum field, you're reaching into the information, the dimension of information, which we know we reach through a Fourier transform, and it's all here right in front of us. when people pass on, the message they send back is that stepping out of their body is like stepping into another room, and we're all still here. But on the other side, here's a little mind-boggling thing. On the other side, since there is no time and no space, that means that we are in existence there all the time, and that we are watching ourselves have this experience in our timed reality here, and that the information space is what actually created us. That's God. Information created us. So, or how, whatever supreme being you believe in, but please, you need to believe in one, because there is a power greater than yourself, because we are, even though we are infinitely powerful, we are also finite beings in this physical body. Okay, that's all I have for today. If you'd like to speak to me about this further, and I'd love to speak to you about that, I have ongoing classes with a rolling enrollment, and I'd love to speak to you more about this. Just go to scientifichealer.com/appointment. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you, and please forward this to someone who could use the help. Please give it a thumbs up or 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to my channel. I will see you next week, same time, same place, in the next video.